Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Are you ready for the week that is to come? I'm not. Very few news stories last 2 weeks. Almost nothing. This story, George Floyd, we're at like a week and a half. So we're not even at the 2-week mark. And I wonder how long it's going to go on. My point is, it's definitely, all this is going to get much, much, much worse before it gets better. Here's a little context. Maybe we should do a whole segment on this later. But I was thinking about it this weekend. On the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being civil war, I think we're at like a 3. I can make an argument for a 2. We're at a 2. We have a long way to go. Everyone needs to pace themselves. We're just getting started here. I want to resist being overly dramatic here, because civilizations have gone through some pretty difficult times. But I've certainly never seen anything like this when it comes to shame. The use of shame, public shaming. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. I want to give a couple examples here. But let me just make this point. This stuff all used to go on college campuses. And people would just dismiss it as like, oh, Slater, why are you talking about what's going on at Berkeley? Right? Well, those kids have graduated. So it's not about college campus anymore. It's now everywhere. And really, in the end, it's not even really about race. It could be about anything. That's just what they're grabbing onto to achieve their ends. Let's build here. So we'll start with the seemingly least important, and we'll build up here quickly, because this is all happening fast. So this was last night. I saw on Twitter trending, it said CrossFit. I was like, uh-oh. Because anytime you see someone trending on Twitter, it means they're going to be canceled. So the founder of CrossFit, Glassman, it's a long story, it doesn't even matter. He wrote Floyd19 on Twitter. And here's someone with 19 Twitter followers. Wrote back, hey, Reebok, Rogue Fitness, Nike, this is an unacceptable comment from one of your brand partners and another example of atrocious behavior from leadership at CrossFit. I'm pretty sure they don't represent your brand values, and I hope you will look into this matter seriously. Boom, done. 1 hour later, Reebok, after 10 years of a relationship, ended it right there. One tweet from the founder of CrossFit, done, shamed. Pretty amazing. Drew Brees, you heard that one the other day, gave a completely reasonable response about what the American flag means to him, his grandfather, World War II, whole thing. He was shamed to do an apology the next day. You know all about that, groveling to the mob. But now his wife gave a groveling apology, like she did something wrong. And she wrote this whole long Instagram piece about how we are the problem. And she wrote this whole long thing about how she's the problem because we are not actively looking for racial prejudice. And I would argue, perhaps the opposite is true, right? Maybe that's the problem. Perhaps people are looking too hard. But these apologies will never be enough. They'll never be enough. You can never be sincere enough. You can never say enough. You can never do enough, because they don't want an apology. So much more than that. That's just the first step of your submission. I'll prove that in a second. But Tom Cotton, we're going to do actually this in the next segment. This whole Tom Cotton drama is such an amazing example. Again, same thing that's happened on college campus newspapers for about a decade or so, but now it's the New York Times. So they wrote this, the op-ed editor wrote this super long, like, apology, like, oh, I'm so sorry we did this, blah, I can't believe we're, blah, blah. And one of the lines is, the tone of the essay in places is needlessly harsh and falls short of the thoughtful approach that advances useful debate. Again, we're gonna talk more about details of it all in the next segment. So the college campus shaming has now moved into the New York Times op-ed section. The New York Times op-ed section, which, by the way, has published op-eds from Hamas. A few months ago, they published an op-ed from the Taliban and Putin and the communist dictator of Venezuela, Maduro. But Tom Cotton is a bridge too far. We can't have the Republican senator from Arkansas. We can't let him. Taliban, Hamas, sure, no problem. But Tom Cotton, whoa. All right, so there's a ton of those. Again, we'll do that one in the next segment in greater detail. But now it gets even more, right? Because it's not enough. This is the police chief in Webster, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief.
What? Like, I look at like, wait, what is going on? So for a week or so, it was you need to kneel, right? And you've seen pictures of Joe Biden and other white people kneeling. Actually, do we have the picture of the senators kneeling? Yeah, so there's a bunch of senators kneeling down. I saw someone wrote, they said, if this looks like a hostage situation, it is. Look at that. But even that's not enough. So I've seen pictures of police chiefs kneeling and National Guard members kneeling in solidarity. But it's not enough because it's never enough. It'll never be enough. Now you have to lay on your stomach to satiate the angry mob. But even then it won't be enough. Did you hear the guy? So the guy lays down on his stomach, the police chief lays on his stomach, and the crowd chanted, "Thank you, chief," for 3 seconds. And then immediately following that, some guy screams from the back, "It's not enough!" What do you want to get naked? You want to strip down? What's next? Which leads us to today's culmination. This is the poor mayor. I say poor mayor of Minneapolis. Jacob, is that his name? Jacob Frey, F-R-E-Y, but I think it's Fry. I don't know. Poor guy. He's 38 years old. Could not be more unprepared and out of his league in this moment. I saw this guy was the mayor when this whole thing first happened. I saw some press conference. I was like, who's the kid? Who's the baby face up there? This is the leader of Minneapolis. Oh, he's in big trouble. He won't make it through this. No way. He'll have to resign. Because that's the thing now. You have to resign. Like the head of Reddit resigned and said that he is going to implore the board to fill his position with a black man or black person. And a bunch of people are resigning from positions for that same. By the way, the founder of Reddit is married to Serena Williams, so he'll be fine. But wow, that's an interesting prediction. The mayor of Minneapolis resigns and fills it with a black person as like the ultimate, we're sorry, I'm so sorry here. Maybe. But he's out, he can't do this. He can't handle this. So check out this moment. Here he is. I think we'll break this down in a couple of clips. He is just parroting the newspeak of the day here, saying whatever, these terms that all used to exist in college campuses, but now this is part of it's supposed to be our regular vernacular. And here he is, doing a great job of parroting it all.
You have to take responsibility here. I've been coming to grips with my own brokenness in this situation, my own failures, my own shortcomings, and I know there needs to be deep-seated structural reform in terms of how the department operates. The systemically racist system needs to be revamped. Okay. The police union needs to be put in its place. We need to make sure that everything from the union contract to the way that the arbitration functions to the way that our officers and the culture in the department behaves,
Jacob Fry, we have a yes or no question for you.
All right, we stop there. Okay, so he's saying all the right things, right? Like, oh, systematic this and structural, and we need to blah, 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 blah. And then this woman jumps in and says, yes or no question, and then asks him, it's clearly a question that requires no nuance whatsoever. Here's what she says.
Jacob Fry, we have a yes or no question for you. Yes or no, will you commit to defunding Minneapolis Police Department? What did I say? We don't want no more police. Is that clear? We don't want people with guns toting around in our community, shooting us down. You have an answer? It is a yes or a no. It is a yes or a no. Will you defund the Minneapolis Police Department? All right, be quiet, y'all. Be quiet, because it's important that we actually hear this. It's important that we hear this, because if y'all don't know, he's up for re-election next year. If y'all don't know, he's up for re-election next year. And if he says no, guess what the we gonna do next year? What'd you say? Watch it one more time.
I do not support the full abolition of the police.
All right. Get out of here. Go. Go home. Go home, Jacob. Go home. Go home, Jacob. Go home. Go home, Jacob. Go home.
Okay, I want to be clear. He said, I do not support a full abolition of the police department. Get out of here! Go home, Jacob! Unbelievable. Do we have the final clip? The one of him walking away in shame? Again, do we have the rest? There's like another one of him from the other side. Yeah. Unbelievable. Amazing. Amazing. And that, again, that stuff would happen on police department or in college campuses all the time. And now that's the mayor of Minneapolis who doesn't support abolishing the police department. Amazing. What's going on? Shame, shame, shame. We're gonna do this on tomorrow's show. We're gonna talk about the use of shame and shaming and the stocks and the pillory. The pillory is where you put your head and your hands in, and the use of public shaming over the century. I mean, that's why we used to have those stocks and the pillories for public shaming and humiliation. There's nothing new under the sun. We've gone back to it. And I'll make the case tomorrow that we've gone back to it maybe in an even more cruel way than we did before. But that's why we stopped public humiliation in the square. It was in the public square. It was too cruel. It was too cruel. And our founding fathers and others made arguments that like we can't do this anymore as a society. We can't be shaming people like this all the time in the public square. It's got to stop. And they stopped it, but we're back. So we're going to talk about that history tomorrow. Let me take a break. I want to come back. We're going to talk about the New York Times editorial. Because when I first saw this happening, I was like, this is silly. But the more I thought, it was like, oh no, this is actually a really, really important data point in this whole moment. I'll end with this real quick. Someone the other day asked me what we can do in this moment. And just off the top of my head, these are the three I thought of, and I think they're still true. Worth more detail, but just to throw it your way. First, mourn with those who mourn. That's always a good thing to do, right? Mourn with those who mourn, because it's not about you. Second thing, listen and ask questions. Ask as many questions as you possibly can and be genuinely curious about them. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions all the time. And then the third thing, never, ever say something that you don't believe is true. So in that regard, good for the mayor of Minneapolis. True story. Mike Slater. We'll talk about the New York Times next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I want to take a couple minutes here and talk about the New York Times drama. I think this is really important. Obviously, things are moving fast. There's going to be a million other examples like this, but this is an important one to know and relate back to and tell our kids and grandkids about. So here's the background. Tom Cotton, Republican senator from Arkansas, wrote this editorial. He did not write the headline here. The New York Times wrote the headline, but the headline is, Tom Cotton, send in the troops. The nation must restore order. The military stands ready. And it's a completely sensible op-ed about the history of the military being used to stop riots. From Washington in 1794 with the Whiskey Rebellion. Did we end up talking about that? I don't know if we did talk about that. If not, if we haven't, we will. So Washington, 1974, and the Whiskey Rebellion, all the way to Dwight Eisenhower and JFK and LBJ, HW in 1992 in LA. Also the history of that happening. Tom Cotton talked about how the majority of people support using the military today to do this. So this is a majority opinion, whether you agree with it or not, this is a majority opinion. And the New York Times writers, they went loco. One of the writers, this is actually this is the head of their 1619 project. It's the Pulitzer Prize winning 1619 project. She said, as a black woman, as a journalist, as an American, I am deeply ashamed that we ran this. I'm deeply ashamed. I saw this tweet from one person, and I thought it was just the one New York Times writer who wrote it, but apparently a bunch of people, like it was like a weird cultish response where a lot of New York Times writers tweeted the same tweet. And the tweet was, running this op-ed puts all black people in danger, including New York Times staff members. You're in danger because this op-ed ran. You're in danger. What does that mean? How can you be in danger? What is this? What's going on? I haven't heard anyone argue against it, by the way. Just people calling it dangerous. And again, I think I mentioned in the last segment that New York Times recently has published pieces from the president of Turkey and Putin and the Taliban and Hamas and Maduro, but Tom Cotton is too far. This is Bari Weiss. So Bari Weiss, she's a writer at the New York Times, but a very sensible person. Here's what she said. She said, the civil war inside the New York Times is between the mostly young wokes and the mostly 40-plus liberals. It's the same one raging inside other publications and companies across the country. The dynamic is always the same. The old guard lives by a set of principles we can broadly call civil libertarianism. They assumed they shared the worldview with the young people they hired, who called themselves liberals and progressives, but it was an incorrect assumption. The new guard has a different worldview, one articulated best by John Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. We'll talk about that in a second. They call it safetyism, in which the right of people to feel emotionally and psychologically safe trumps what were previously considered core liberal values like free speech. Perhaps the cleanest example of this dynamic was in 2018 when David Remnick, he's the head of the Times, under tremendous public pressure from his staffers, disinvited Steve Bannon from appearing on stage at the New Yorker Ideas Festival. But there's dozens and dozens of examples. I've been mocked by many people over the last few years for writing about the campus culture wars. They told me it was a sideshow. But this is why it always mattered. The people who graduated from those campuses would rise to power inside key institutions and transform them. So just like on my radio show over the years, we've talked a lot about restorative justice in our schools, K through 12 schools, and what a disaster and how ridiculous that is. So we'll have time to do that here one of these days. But just like K through 12 restorative justice is leaving schools and now into the real world, again, with people wanting to abolish the police. Same thing, we're seeing all the, campus crybabies, all like the whining and just the silencing of freedom of speech that we've been documenting for years now on college campuses. These people now have jobs in real places of influence, and they're using those same shaming techniques to shut down the adults, who many of them let them in. Remember, we would always do stuff like, man, when these college kids, when they graduate and get the real world, man, they're gonna get slapped in the face. No, they did the slapping. They went into the real world and they've been slapping and shaming the old guard. And the old guard is not only kneeled down, but laid down on their stomachs for them. So the head of the op-ed section wrote this whole like super long blowhardy explanation as to why they published it. Oh, here's all the good things we've done at the Times. Here's why we think police should be abolished. Here's how we supported the riots. Here's how we here's all our bona fides. And the most it was ridiculous. The most basic response, I read someone, John Arnold, he made this on Twitter. The proper response is, oh, hey guys, we don't agree with Tom Cotton's op-ed that the military should be called in, but we definitely believe that the closest thing that we have to a national newspaper should allow a senator from the majority party of the federal government to make that argument. And then we can debate it back. By the way, the New York Times did polish up with a follow-up with another op-ed, and the headline was something like, Tom Cotton's a fascist or something. I was like, oh, let me pull it up actually, because that's a bold claim for me to make without Tom Cotton's fascist op-ed. Yeah, okay, so so he apologized, did the whole thing, and then that wasn't enough. He says, and that leads me to a concern that's being expressed within the Times, a fear that we have endangered our colleagues, and specifically our African-American colleagues, by publishing Cotton's op-ed. We've endangered. What do we mean endangered? That's the safety. So real quick, the head of the op-ed, that guy, he resigned yesterday. Worked his whole life to get to this position to be the head of the op-ed section of the New York Times and lost it because he dared publish an editorial from a top-ranking senator making a historical argument that a majority of Americans agree with. Isn't that amazing? Shamed into resigning. So let's talk about safetyism here just for a minute. We're going to do a lot about this over the next couple weeks or so because this is what this is. So Coddling the American Mind. That's the book that Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt wrote. It's wonderful. You have to get it. Among other things, the idea, safetyism, is the idea that people are weak and should be protected rather than exposed to challenges, right? So you are weak and pathetic, and you need to be protected. You need to be wrapped in bubble wrap, physically and emotionally now, rather than exposed to difficult things and difficult challenges, physical and emotional in life. So it used to be physical safety, right? We need to protect kids from sharp objects, and we need to protect kids from being abducted, which they have a chapter in here about how that never happens, by the way. Abduction should never cross your mind as a parent. You have the same risk of like being hit by a hot air balloon or something. Like, do you walk outside and fear that your child is going to be hit by a hot air balloon falling from the... No, you don't, of course not. So don't worry about abductions either, but we've been trained to be fearful of it, and that's a whole different thing. But physical safety, that was one thing, but now it's moved into emotional safetyism. You can't let kids, and now even college kids, be exposed to ideas that could cause any sort of distress whatsoever, and that makes kids weak. The example, the analogy they give in the book is peanut allergies. So in the 90s, parents were told not to give their kids peanuts when they were little kids because they may have a peanut allergy. But it turns out that backfired. It made more people allergic to peanuts because our immune system grows stronger when we're exposed to peanuts and other bacteria and stuff when we're kids. So then you don't have a peanut allergy when you grow up. When you don't let your kids play outside or walk to school on their own or go to the store on their own, you're not protecting them from danger. You're making them weak. We get this physically. We totally understand physically. I mean, this is what lifting weights is, right? You lift heavy things, breaks down your muscles so it grows back stronger. If you forced your kids to lay in bed all day, every day, until they're 20, they would have the physical body of like an 8-year-old, right? Their muscles and joints and bones would never develop properly. Like, we get this physically. It makes intuitive sense. And it's no different emotionally. But we've protected our kids physically. Now we're protecting them emotionally. And this is one of the main reasons why there is so much anxiety and depression in the world today. It's not necessarily because times are more difficult. If anything, things have never been better. It's just because we're weaker. Our kids are all grown up and they don't have any resilience. Or even better, anti-fragility, as Nassim Taleb would say. So they share the story from the dean of Stanford. This is the dean of freshmen at Stanford. And she says that she was critical of helicopter parents who just wouldn't let go of their kids when they went off to college. And she was critical of that. And then one day she caught herself leaning across the table at dinner and cutting her son's food for him. He was 10. He was 10. And mommy was cutting his food for him. And she had a flash right there. She thought, hold on, when I was 10, I was babysitting other kids. And now here I am cutting my 10-year-old's food. She might as well chew it for him, spit it out like a baby bird. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got when we first had kids was you need to prepare the child for the way, not the way for the child. So don't prepare the way for the child, which is like, get rid of all the obstacles, get rid of all the hurdles, get rid of all the difficult things so that they have an easy path through life. You don't want to prepare the way for the child. You want to prepare the child for the way. You want to prepare your child so that they can jump over the hurdles and bust through the wall and climb over it, right? All the obstacles. So prepare the child instead, but we flipped it around. Now we're constantly preparing the way for our child, and then they get older and they're adults and they're pathetic. Stephen Horowitz, we actually talked to Stephen the other day. Let me take a break, actually. Let me finish this up next, actually, because I don't want to rush this. But all of this is downstream, right? All of this is downstream. Just like all the issues with policing come from the fact that we've removed God, community, and family from people's lives, right? These were the safeguards. These are the safeguards that every single person had in their life to do the right things. You had God always watching. You had a community around you and a culture around you, and you had your family. When all three of these fail-safes are removed, the only thing we have left is police. And of course, they're not going to handle it perfectly, right? But you had all these other things that we don't even have anymore. We'll expand more on that another day. But it's the same thing here. It's all downstream. We have decades of progressivism, decades of postmodern ideology has trickled down to this. And now we have kids who have graduated college and now they're working at the New York Times and other places of influence. And now they're mayors of major cities. And they'll shame you into compliance if you let them. We'll finish this thought off next. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to finish up this theme about how these college kids just aren't, they've graduated now and they're just not prepared for real life at all. So this is Stephen Horowitz. We talked to Stephen, I think it was last week. He's an economist at Ball State. This is what he wrote. He said, denying children the freedom to explore on their own takes away important learning opportunities that help them to develop not just independence and responsibility, but a whole variety of social skills that are central to living with others in a free society. If this argument is correct, parenting strategies and laws make it harder for kids to play on their own, pose a serious threat to liberal societies by flipping our default setting from figure out how to solve this conflict on your own to invoke force and/or third parties whenever conflict arises. It's just like raising kids, right? Every single day, Jack and Grace, my 2- and 3-year-old, there's some, like, they want the same toy, or he's touching me, or some other 2- and 3-year-old thing, and they look at me. They look right at me, like, ah! And they're like for me to solve it. And 90% of the time, I'm like, guys, figure it out. And then they go back and they figure it out. They're 2 and 3, okay? But we can't do this with adults today. A society that weakens children's ability to learn these skills denies them what they need for smooth social interaction. The coarsening of social interaction that will result will create a world of more conflict and violence, here we are, and one in which people's first instinct will be increasingly to invoke coercion by other parties to solve problems they ought to be able to solve themselves. College these last few years, decades, it's a luxury product. It's a luxury product where the customer is always right? And the kids are coddled and the kids are protected from outside ideas the entire time. Imagine going to a place to learn, and every professor and every bureaucracy that exists has been put in place there and to continually tell you how right you are about everything all the time. And every day you're just told how wonderful you are and how terrible everyone else is by extension, and you're never challenged once. Because that's what the colleges are now. They're there to serve the paying customer. And in the end, they've made them ill-prepared for the real world. And now they're in the real world. And now they expect every other institution in America to bend to their will and to protect their emotions. New York Times can't even print opinion pieces from US senators if they disagree with the premise. There's 3 elements of victimhood culture on college campuses. We've touched about them, a few of them today already. First of all, individuals and groups display a high sensitivity to slight, right? So the littlest thing is a huge trigger, right? Second is a tendency to handle conflicts through complaints to third parties. And then the third is to they seek to cultivate an image of being victims who deserve assistance. Isn't that this? Isn't that what this is? It's just, it used to be on college campuses, and now it's everywhere. Most of this stuff is cosplay, by the way. You know, cosplay is a costume play. It's like a Comic-Con. You just kind of dress up and pretend to be. I saw a video the other day of a bunch of kids on their knees in front of some statue, and their hands were out, and they were like, hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot. And some police shot at them with tear gas, and they all panicked and freaked out. Oh, it's so awful. They're running around, they're coughing. Oh, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. It's like, give me a break. This is role playing. Actually, do we have a video here? This is one of my favorite videos I've seen so far. Here, check this out. This guy got hit by like a rubber bullet.
Breathe. You're good, bro. You're good. Yeah, good. You're good. Good. It's all right. It's all good. I know.
Okay, we can stop there. The guy, they're putting a tourniquet on him. He's not even bleeding, and I'm barely bleeding. And then, we gotta save his life. Breathe, man. He's screaming, like he's in war. Come on. Give me a break. Cosplay. People pretending to be crusading civil rights heroes. No real danger. And any danger, real danger they might be in, you're putting yourself in. And there's nothing heroic about that. But this all comes from people desperately wanting a sense of purpose and meaning. Now, the people who are actually making a difference when it comes to their communities and when it comes to race relations and serving kids in the inner city and all that stuff, they're not marching. They're busy. I'll end here. I have time for this? I'll go quick. John Roberts, he gave the commencement address at his son's middle school a couple years back. He's such a good speech. He says, commencement speakers will usually wish you good luck. I will not do that, and I'll tell you why. From time to time in the years to come, I hope you will be treated unfairly so that you will come to know the value of justice. I hope you'll suffer betrayal because that will teach you the importance of loyalty. Sorry to say, but I hope you'll be lonely from time to time so that you don't take friends for granted. I wish you bad luck, again, from time to time so that you will be conscious of the role of chance in your life and understand that your success is not completely deserved and that the failure of others is not completely deserved either. And when you lose, I hope every now and then your opponent will gloat over your failure. It's a way for you to understand the importance of sportsmanship. I hope you'll be ignored so you know the importance of listening to others. And I hope you'll have just enough pain to learn compassion. And whether I wish these things or not, they're going to happen. Whether you benefit from them or not will depend on your ability to see the messages in your misfortunes. Isn't that great? How about that message, right? We have the kids want it, we got to protect. And here's John Roberts saying, no, I hope you are treated unfairly, betrayed, lonely, people gloat at your failure. I hope you're ignored, and I hope you experience pain. That's the opposite of safetyism, and we need more of that. I got to go here. Again, mourn with those who mourn, ask questions, be curious, and never, ever say anything that you don't believe to be true. True story. Mike Slater. Coming up, Professor Vincent Racaniello will get the latest with COVID. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So in case you've forgotten, depending on where you live in the country, there's still a pandemic going on, and I still think it's important to talk about and figure out what's going on and what the latest is. We do that, of course, with the professor of virology at Columbia University, and he also has a podcast, This Week in Virology, which you should definitely listen to. That's Professor Vincent Racaniello. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Very good. Glad you're here. I got to ask you just big picture, because media perception is one thing, and I try so badly not to pay attention to that, whether if they decide it's bad or good or whatever. What do you think? Where are we right now when it comes to cases, hospitalizations? What metrics are you looking at? What are you seeing?
Oh, it really depends where you are. For example, here where I am in the New York area, cases have gone down now for several weeks, and there are very few. I talked to my clinician colleague out on Long Island on Friday. He said they have 3 people in the hospital with COVID-19, and that was, 150 a couple of weeks ago. And he can see the time when there's no more patients in his hospital. But if you go to other states, some states are having huge increases now because the virus is only getting to them. All right, so it really depends. And then overseas, some countries are way down in numbers of cases, and other countries like Brazil shooting up. So it's all asynchronous, right? And it really depends where you are. If you're in Brazil now, you're in the middle of the pandemic, right? So that's why I tell people, still be careful. And if you're talking about traveling, look at where you're going within the U.S. especially. California's got a lot of cases. Places in the Midwest and the South have a lot of cases. Still be really careful about looking at those numbers. You can easily get them at any Department of Health website for the state.
You're looking at numbers or hospitalizations? What's more important to you?
To me, the numbers, because that's telling me how much virus is around, although that's, again, only a fraction because we're not testing everybody. We're only testing mostly sick people, right? And there are a lot of people who are not very sick but infected. So I'm looking at the numbers. But yes, second, I'm looking at the hospitalizations because that tells me that the hospitals are being able to handle the situation. And we're going to have little outbreaks here and there as people get together over the summer and so forth. But I think the hospitals are going to be able to handle it from what I'm seeing right now. And that's good news.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a bunch of questions, but what else are you looking at, Professor? What's on your mind about this?
Okay, number one, last time I spoke with you, you said, should we forget about hydroxychloroquine? And I mistakenly said yes, because you should never say...
I remember, yes.
So here's the story. there were 2 publications last week on hydroxychloroquine, and they both said it doesn't do any good. And they were both retracted in the past week because the people who did the studies weren't able to get the actual data. So they weren't properly designed trials where you give people some. These were looking at the data of everyone who's been infected. So they withdrew them because they couldn't take a look at the primary data and said, we're not sure. But just the other day, another study was released, which seems to be okay. I'm going to reserve judgment because who knows what's going to happen. And that says there doesn't appear to be a clinical benefit. So right now, there are a couple of other trials in progress, well-designed trials, and we should hear about those in the next few weeks or so. Again, so far, it doesn't look like there's a clinical benefit of hydroxychloroquine, but I will say we still have to wait the results of those other trials.
Wow, so it's back in the game. It's back. HCQ's back. It was gone for a while. Now we're back. First of all, I very much appreciate, Professor, you bringing that back up again. Remember a couple weeks ago I asked you where you've been wrong, and you were like, oh, here's one, and here's one. And I value that so much because I think, especially in the expert class, there's such an incentive to never, ever admit you're wrong. I mean, do you see that in your profession and et cetera, others?
Totally. Let me tell you something. If you work on something your whole life, do you want to say at one point that it's not right? Do you want to? Many scientists don't want to do that. They put 20 years into something and they themselves prove that their idea is not right. They won't back off. They have too much invested, which is not the way science should work. Now, that's not the majority of the way science works. Mostly things get corrected, and I'm the first to admit when I'm wrong because that's the way science should be. And that gets people more confident about science when they see scientists saying, oh, I'm wrong, let's move forward. So it happened.
It seems counterintuitive. Yeah, it seems counterintuitive because you'd think if you admit you're wrong, then you're always wrong. No, but isn't it the core of science is falsifying your results, right? Isn't that like part of it? So you think
that's the core. Yes, you have to show when you're wrong and when you're right. It's a big mixture of the two because you're never going to be right all the time. That's crazy. Who's right all the time, right?
Yeah.
And scientists are no different. So yes, you're absolutely right. This is how science works. You do things. You publish, oh, it's wrong. Someone else figures it out. You figure it out, and we move on, and then we move forward and help people's lives. That's what our job is to make things good for your health.
Yeah, human nature jumps in, and the whole thing screws up. Let's talk about testing accuracy. So our local CVS here, and I know a bunch of them, but you can do drive-by testing, but you got to do it yourself. So you got to stick this thing up your nose, both nostrils yourself. So I see that and I'm like, I don't know if people are going to do that right. So that's a problem. But then also the test itself now. What do you know about the tests itself? And if I get a negative or a positive result, how much confidence should I have in that?
So it depends what kind of test you're getting now. I think these drive-up tests are still looking for nucleic acid of the virus, right? Where you put the swab in your nose, you give it to them, they process it, and they say you're infected or you're not infected, okay? Those are pretty reliable, but you're right. The part of taking the sample is tricky when it's a self-done. Yeah. Now, actually, a study has been done showing that when people sample themselves, there's a reasonable accuracy there. But you can imagine, look, the nares, right, the very tip of your nose, it's a small area. And if the virus happens not to be there in your mucus at that particular time, it's going to be a negative. So I would say, if you can, go back every week and get the test done. I don't think they're very expensive, right? And go week after week. And that, the more you do something, the more confidence you can have in the accuracy, for sure. So if it's negative 1 week, go back the next week. If it's negative 2 times in a row, then you're probably not infected. But remember, the following week you could be infected. So you have to really check. I think that would be great if everyone could do that. Okay. Now that's the nucleic acid test. The antibody test, I don't think they're doing these self-administer because there you have to have blood. Right? You can either take blood from a vein, which has to be done by a healthcare professional, or from a little prick on your finger, but those aren't widely available yet. So what you're talking about is the nucleic acid test for sure.
The antibody test, do you find those to be accurate right now?
So the antibody tests, interestingly, their accuracy depends on how many people are infected. Right? So when very few people are infected in a given area, their accuracy is low. I mean, their overall accuracy is always the same, but when fewer people are infected, it's harder to believe the result that you're getting. When a lot of people are infected.
What's the connection? What's the connection of your result to other people? Why would that be connected?
Oh, there's no connection. There's a false positive and a false negative rate. And as infections go down, that gets amplified. And as they go up, it gets negated. That's the thing. So, but right now in the New York area, we have very few infections. So these antibody tests have a lot of inaccuracy. However, if you do the vein tests and you do it multiple times, and you're infected, it says you're infected, that's going to be a reliable result. But those tests aren't rolled out to people like the CVS test yet. Okay, they will be eventually.
I was going to say, do you think we will in the next months, or these things just take so long to get up and running?
No. I think they're going to be rolling out soon. These there'll be a dipstick where you take a little pinprick of your finger, you put it on a dipstick, kind of like a pregnancy test, right? And then it gives you a line if you're positive. And the same thing, if you do that, that's going to be available in the next month or so. Absolutely, and that's fine. And you should try it if it's a reasonable price. I mean, and I hope they don't charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars for it. But if you get a positive, go back in a couple of weeks and do it again. And if it's positive again, then you've been infected at some time in the past. And that's a reliable result for sure. Okay,
very good. I read something the other day about, they think maybe this has been spreading in America since January. Not a lot, but a couple cases dating back in January. Does that even matter? Like, when you look at that, is that just like a trivia thing, or does it matter to you?
Well, it matters because it tells me that if we had been testing extensively in January, we could have picked up those early cases and quarantined them, and that would have stopped the spread. So there were cases on the West Coast that came directly from Wuhan, right? So in Washington, there were a cluster of cases from an initial person, a guy who came from Wuhan. He was on business, and he came to Washington. He actually developed symptoms, but then he had infected a lot of people around him in the meantime. And so if we had found those people, we could have restricted that spread. Same thing happening in New York as people came from Europe, they brought virus in. So I think it's important for the next pandemic, right? If we're not going to do anything for this one, it's too late. For the next one, we should do extensive testing. As soon as we see something happening in China or wherever the first outbreak is, we should do extensive testing here and stop it. You could really stop it, right? You could quarantine a lot of people initially and then restrict travel and stop it. And that's the lesson here for the next pandemic. Really, you're right. There's nothing to be done about this one.
Now.
The next one is the key,
Okay, very good. I got a quote here from Fauci. When you look at the history of coronaviruses, the common coronaviruses that cause the common cold, which you've talked about a lot, Professor, the reports in the literature are that the durability of immunity that's protective ranges from 3 to 6 months to almost always less than a year. That's not a lot of durability and protection. So durability is a new word in this that I've come across here. What does that mean, and do you agree with the doctor?
All right, so durability, when we're talking about immunity, durability means how long it lasts. So if I, as a kid, get polio, that immunity, when I recover, lasts my whole life. If you get the polio vaccine, the immunity lasts your whole life. That's durable. Flu vaccine, less than a year. But what Fauci is saying is that for a common cold coronavirus, when you get it and then you recover, and they're not very serious infections, you can get infected the next year. But what he didn't add to that, which I think is really important, is that you don't get any symptoms, or you get really mild symptoms after first infection.
That's right.
Right. So I want everyone to remember this. It doesn't matter if the immunity is not durable. There's enough there to protect you against serious disease. And I think that's what's going to happen with SARS-CoV-2. You'll get infected. Within a year, you'll have really low immunity. But when you get the second infection, it'll be really mild. Okay, and that's the key.
I remember you telling us that. I can't believe I forgot that. Yes, of course I remember that. Okay, wonderful. I read, this is from Arnaldo Caruso, a guy in Italy. And there's this article about, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but because I try not to read these articles, actually, Professor. Like, I read the headlines and I'm like, I'm going to wait till I talk to the professor about them. But I think the gist is, and I've heard this a lot, that the virus is getting weaker, or it's what's the word? They've been using the word weaker. But I remember you telling us, no, the virus isn't changing. It's people who are changing. But what do you think? Is this weaker than maybe we thought it was?
No. So actually, a couple of people called me about this last week. A lady from ABC News. She said, should we report this? I said, no, don't bother with it. Here's a guy, he's working in the ICU in Italy, and the number of cases are going down. So he thinks the virus is getting weaker. That's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
You would not say that. All that's happening is in Italy, the cases are way down. The virus hasn't changed. There's no evidence that it's getting weaker. It's just his observation. You know, they went and talked to a doc who's on the front line, and I understand that. But, you know, she also talked to 10 other virologists and public health people, and they agreed with me. There's nothing here. It's not getting weaker. Look at Brazil. Look at other countries where it's going crazy right now. It's not getting any weaker. So, yeah, you were right not to read the article. That's great. You're learning.
Well, especially the headline had a question mark in it. You know, is the coronavirus really getting weaker? And when it's a question mark, usually the answer is like, no, it's not. Or whatever. All right, well, that's how they get you to click. Last question, Professor. We got to run here. And I'm not asking you to put any comment on obviously the protests that are going on, but do you expect there to be a pretty big surge in this? Because we've been told you can't go to grandma's funeral with more than 10 people, and now we have groups of tens of thousands. So do you see a surge from this, do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of it's unfortunate that people can't go to funerals, right? And they should be able to wear face masks and stay apart. I think that's really not the right direction. I was at a little event here in my town yesterday of a few hundred people, and everybody wore face masks. Everyone stood far apart, you know. So I think there are ways you can manage these larger groups of people. You know, again, most of the transmission is indoors. Did you know that over 40% of the cases in the U.S. are with like nursing homes and prisons and meatpacking factories, all inside, right? So I think the outdoor transmission is really minimal. I think if you wear a mask, you can be together. Now, these funerals, 10 people, you could space them apart with face masks. I think we should let people do that because people have to grieve and move on, right?
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Good stuff, Professor. Thanks so much for your time. This Week in Virology is the website, and you can watch Professor's entire course on virology on YouTube, which is just crazy. Professor, wonderful, sir. I hope we can do it again next week.
See you then. Take care.
Have a great day. Thank you, sir. That's This Week in Virology. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.